A really warm welcome on behalf of both UCL, where I work, and ucisa, who I also do some work for. I'm the chair of the ucisa Digital Education Group, and I've been involved in ucisa stuff for the last 12 years or so. My name is Fiona Strawbridge, and I'm chairing this conference as well, or event. So, a couple of things just to note. Do please turn your phones to silent. And please, although I'm sure the draw of email will be almost irresistible, do try and take this opportunity to get away from the day-to-day stuff and to listen and engage. So I'm just going to start this event by talking a bit about why we're here, and just to give you my own sort of institutional and personal perspective on this. I, in the last year, have moved from knowing almost nothing about digital accessibility to spending probably 2/3 of my time thinking and worrying about it. And this is all thanks to the legislation which hit the statute book last September. I didn't actually find out about it at that point. I think the thing which first alerted me was this document. I don't know how many of you have seen this. It was produced by an all-party parliamentary working group, or committee. It's called Accessible Virtual Learning Environments, and it was produced by an organisation called Policy Connect. And there's a guy called Robert McLaren who works there, who's been instrumental in bringing this together. It's a very useful piece of guidance, but it was seeing an email on a Gistmail list about this document that first alerted me to the new digital accessibility legislation. And to be honest, at first I thought, well, that looks like an interesting thing. I'll get round to reading it when I get round to it. And then I noticed there was quite a lot of email conversation about this document. And some of my colleagues, who are normally quite level-headed, seem to be getting into a sort of degree of panic about it. And so I read the document and I realised that actually this legislation was already in place, and that not just I, but my whole institution was going to have to take action. This was about sort of October, November time last year. So I alerted senior colleagues here at UCL that we needed to do something. And of course I didn't duck quickly enough, and I found myself leading on our institutional response. Now my role is Head of Digital Education. I work in information services. Accessibility touches on so many different areas, and so it has been quite a learning experience. And it's been a very good networking experience, actually, working with different people to try and work out how we are going to respond as an institution. In short, we had to, and I'm sure you're in the same position or a similar position, we've had to tell all of the people who are responsible for our web presence, which probably number in the hundreds, that they need to do things differently. And we've had to tell the academic body who produce online content for learning that they need to do things differently. And that hasn't always gone down terribly well. And we knew that we needed to make sure that we had really clear guidance centrally. So, of course, I started doing searches on our website for where our accessibility guidance was. And I found there were lots of bits and pieces, but they weren't sort of joined up. And there was overlap, and there were gaps, and there was contradiction. And it really wasn't something we could really confidently point people to. But we needed to let the community know that they needed to take action. So we had a big delay when we sort of flailed around to an extent, trying to get our resources together and trying to develop better training. We got there, but it took us until Easter to send out the comms that we were confident about the legislation and the need to act. So that's, 6 months after the legislation came into force. We now have an institutional task and finish group, and that's being chaired by the Dean who led on the institution's GDPR response. We thought if he can get that one through, then he'll be a good person to drive this, and he has been. He's been very engaged and very committed. We've also got a well-funded project in our information services area to do quite a bit of work. So that is very useful, and I realise that not all institutions have been able to provide funding to take this forward. The things that I've struggled with and have sort of prompted me to talk to ucisa and to suggest that we bring this event together are that the legislation is aimed at the public sector broadly, and universities tend to work in a slightly different way, I think. I think public sector websites tend to be fairly top-down and managed. Things are a little bit looser, shall we say, in higher education. And when you get to the VLE, to the online learning environment, then it is more like the Wild West than anything, because you've got all of these academics individually creating their own content in their own unique and creative ways, which aren't always terribly accessible. Another thing I've struggled with is the scope of the legislation. Okay, it applies to websites and apps, but what actually is a website? And if the VLE is in scope, then is the student information system in scope? And is the HR system in scope? And are our research platforms in scope? And I still don't really know with confidence what is in scope. There are things in the legislation which talk about disproportionate burden and about substantial revision, but those are really open to interpretation. And you get the sense that we probably need to take legal advice on these, which is difficult for individual institutions to afford. We're discovering actually the hard way that testing our platforms is difficult. We thought we'd done a reasonable job of testing the VLE, and then we went to write the accessibility statement for it and realised we needed to test it more thoroughly. So that has been quite challenging. And the other thing, of course, is when you go and talk to your colleagues about this, they want to know, well, what's the penalty? What will the fine be? Does this have teeth? Will it be me? Who's accountable for this? And again, I don't really have a very clear answer. And when I say, well, I don't really have a very clear answer, but it probably won't be quite as bad as GDPR, then they visibly relax. Other challenges? Well, the deadlines. Next Monday, in case you hadn't realised, for getting your website sorted. So that's and you've got the weekend, And then the other thing, I guess, is that I have a day job, and my day job has been really neglected by the time I've been spending on this. But I do feel, this is a tremendously worthwhile piece of legislation, actually. The fact that it's gathering people together in this room now, and I've been to a number of other events which have been really well attended, and people have been very engaged. And to be honest, I think that even if the legislation wasn't there, I would now be thinking, well, we should be doing this anyway, because it is the right thing to do, and it's been an area which has been neglected. So, in fact, I've learned a lot, and I'm a convert, and I do believe that we need to make our institutional services much more accessible. And if they're accessible to people who have disabilities, then they're more usable for everyone. I've learned a lot from colleagues here at UCL, but I've also learned a lot from people in the sector, and we have got many of them here today to talk to you. So we've got folk from Abilitynet, which is a disability charitable organisation. They are absolute authorities on doing testing and what, the kinds of things that you might need to do. JISC have been super helpful. They run monthly surgeries online, and they're also looking to get some legal guidance on behalf of the sector. Policy Connect, who were part of the all-party parliamentary working group and have brought this document together. Government Digital Services, who are trying to help to make it clearer to us what we need to do. And my sort of top speed dial person, who isn't here today because he's on his wedding anniversary, Alistair McNaught, who is really such an authority and such a person of sort of wise words in this area. So we've brought as many of those people as we can into the room today, so that you can hear from the people who are the experts in this area, but also from your peers in other institutions on how they have been responding. And you'll have a chance to ask the individual presenters this morning at the end of each presentation, we've got 5 minutes for questions. This afternoon, we'll have a panel session with the institutional representatives, so you can quiz them together about what they have been doing. With my ucisa hat on, I think ucisa can help the sector. It would be helpful to hear from you what kinds of things would be useful for ucisa to do. So we're kicking things off with, there was a director's cut briefing for your IT directors, some of whom will be in the room, and this event. But there may be things that you think that we can help with, so perhaps lobbying suppliers to make their services more accessible. But if there are other things, please let us know. This event has been brought together really quickly. It's our first sort of agile event. And so I'm very grateful to Deborah Green, who is sat there, who's the new CEO of ucisa, and has been really helpful in supporting us in making this work. We've brought it together in short order. The presenters were only approached a couple of months ago, and I'm really grateful that everyone's devoted the time to it. I hope we'll have a successful and interesting day. Any issues? Keep them to yourselves. No, but let me know, and we'll see if there are any difficulties, any sort of practical issues. Please do let me know. So I'm going to hand over now to Adi Latif, who is from Abilitynet, and he's going to tell you about some of the barriers that we build when we're creating systems and on online systems.